Welcome to our first weekly installment of the Leman Yilmadu Ask the Rav podcast. In this podcast, we'll be addressing regular halachic shilos, questions that we've received over the last week or in general, and the relevant answers. This should be a very, very interesting program. We'll get right into it. So the first question I want to address is something which is not very well known. It's a sefer's issue. It could be relevant to sefer Torah, tefillin, and mezuzas. This sometimes could be a problem with sefer will write a mezuza and the letters are not exactly equal. The lines are not exactly equal. This is referred to in the Gemara as kezanav, a kukuba, a keigel. Look where it's narrow on the top and wide on the bottom, or vice versa. So this particular halacha is found in Shulchan Aruch and Hilchos Mezuza, that the lines cannot be becoming wider or narrower one from another. It's not mentioned in Hilchos Tefillin, which is why a lot of people are not aware of it. It's not mentioned in Hilchos Sefer Torah. There might even be suffering that are not aware of this halacha, and some good magiyim who are checking a mezuzah or a tefillin or sefer Torah could pick up on that the lines are not exactly parallel one to another, and it's becoming wider or narrower one line from the other. So although we mentioned this is an issue specifically with mezuza, poskim mention based on Rishonim that this is also going to be a problem with tefillin and sefer Torah. And the logic why it's a problem, because it's not called ksiva tama or chsaf tam. Ksiva tama has to be a complete, proper writing. And if it's because of the chsaf tam, then it makes no difference. Tefillin, mezuzah, sefer Torah. It's strange that I got 3 questions on this topic this week. Usually this is not an usual question. So, as mentioned, it's a problem even in a pair of tefillin, and even if it's only on one side, meaning that one side of the lines, all the lines are parallel to each other, starting from the same spot, but then on the other side, on the second side, there's one line is narrower or wider than the previous one. The question is, how many lines does this create a problem? While someone are arguing there's evidence for this, that it's only if the entire mezuza is written in such a way becoming gradually wider or narrower, the poskim accept that even if there's 3 problematic lines, it's also an issue. And this seems to be proven from the words of the Taz. So if you have 3 lines, each one becoming gradually wider than the previous line, it's a problem. Now, how much should each line be sticking out from the previous one to create a problem? Although there are poskim that say it's only if it's the size of a word, each line has one word bigger than the previous line. From the Rishonim, it seems pretty clear that even one letter wider or narrower is a problem. And we have in the Nemuki Yosef on Hilchos Mezuza, where really it's the Rimilun on Hilchos Mezuza. We're not going to go into that right now. That gives an example that on the first line, on one line it says V'hoyu, the second line it says Hadvara Me'ela, and the third line it says the words Asher Anochi Mitzavcha. If you count up the letters of Hadvara Me'ela, Asher Anochi Mitzavcha, clearly the third line is only slightly wider than the line before, one letter wider. The question, which was not addressed, and it's quite strange that nobody addresses this until the contemporary poskim, is how do you count 3 lines? You have one line which is written normally, all within the sirtut, because mezuzahs have the lines are pretty straight, and straight is an area you can tell where each line begins and finishes. So one line was written, excuse the pun, within the line. And then you have another 2 lines, each one, the 2 consecutive lines are gradually wider than the previous line. Does that make it 3 lines? Or the first line is not included because that's a normal line. It's only the other lines that are becoming bigger. You need another 3 lines besides for a regular line. So what's pretty fascinating about this is that the Shevet Halevi here, Rav Wosner B'nai Brak, has 2 tshuvas on this topic, and he actually contradicts himself. Whereas in Chelik Ches, he writes that so long you have 3 lines, each one wider than the other, even if the one of the lines, the top line is a normal line, that top line is included in the problem. And in Chelik Tes, he has a tshuva where he says, no, you don't count a normal line. It's only the lines that stick out. It's another 3 lines besides for the normal line. So which one did he write first? Which one did he write last? We have to work that out. So his son, Alav Shalom, the Machshavas Halevi, wrote a tshuva where he writes that his father's chelik test tshuva was the Mishnah Achrona, where he said that you don't include the normal line as part of the issue. Although there's no real evidence one way or another, he tries to bring evidence over there, but a lot of the rayas can be disproven easily. And la halacha, there's a very strong case to argue that it makes no difference if there's a normal line or not normal line. There's no such thing as normal lines and abnormal lines. The very fact that you have a tzir, an image that looks like kekuva, kazanov, where there's three lines, each one larger than the other, that itself creates a problem, regardless of what the reason of the problem is, whether the problem is because this is not called ksiva tama, whether the reason is because it looks like you're making a picture, you're not you're supposed to write ksiva, you're not supposed to make tziurim, pictures, and each line becoming bigger looks like a picture. Whatever the reason is, the fact that you have three lines like that could create a problem. And indeed, Rav Elyashiv clearly argued that it's not unlike Rav Wosner Psak, or more correctly, like Rav Wosner's original Psak, that even if one line is a normal line, the next line is wider, and the third line is even wider. That creates this problem. This doesn't mean it cannot be fixed. It could be fixed. Most poskim say this is perfectly fine to fix it. All you have to do is stretch out a line or stretch out a letter, make the letter smaller, and there won't be a problem of shelo, kesidran, that the mezuza or tefillin was not written in order. In one of the cases that I got, in that particular case, the issue was there was a lamed there. So what happens is the lamed was sticking in the regular line, but the top of the lamed was going out of the line. And in this case, Rav Elyashiv says that it's not a problem, which makes a lot of sense. There's no full letter that's sticking out. The same thing would be also in the reverse, that if somebody, in another case that I got, where somebody stretched out the lamed, and therefore doesn't look like the lines are kekuva, are becoming wider and wider, because in one of the lines, the lamed was stretched out to match with the next line, and therefore that also wouldn't be a problem. So this is, like I said, an interesting question, which we don't normally get, but in this case, we actually got this question. Another question, moving on to another topic altogether, not related to safros, but an ordinary question. There's a halacha in Shulchan Aruch that you're not supposed to give food to someone that's not going to make a bracha. Now, someone asked a question. Often there are siblings that are unfortunately not religious. And how do you do this halacha, deal with this halacha? You can't give them food. You have a sibling, you have a guest, and this can cause embarrassment, can distance people you're trying to be mekad of them. How do we deal with this halacha? So I will mention that there's a very interesting svara from Shlomo Zalman. Shlomo Zalman Auerbach argued that the whole purpose of this halacha is because of lifnei iver sit in michshel, you can't cause a stumbling block for someone else. Or in some cases, it would be Isser of Misayeh, which is the Isser D'Rabbanan. With D'Rabbanan, even if they could get the food themselves, you can't, it still shouldn't assist them to do an Avera. So the Shlomo Zalman argued creatively that by insisting they make a bracha, by not giving them food, you're causing even a bigger stumbling block. You're distancing them from Yiddishkeit. So what's worse? Is this bracha what matters, or it's the big picture where you want them to be niskarav to Yiddishkeit? Now that's a very creative argument, and some people want to even compare it to a surgery, where sometimes the doctor will go and cut off a part of the body because he wants to save the entire body. But from a clear halachic point of view, it's hard to argue that argument when you're clearly currently causing a mikshel. There's some evidence of this argument in the Reb Kiva Eger and Tefer Shmuel. I don't want to go into that right now, but generally, poskim do not rely on that, and there's various solutions that are provided. One solution often is where you actually make a bracha out loud and you have them in mind. That doesn't always work, but sometimes that could work. So you're really sort of making a bracha. You make the brachas available and accessible for them. So if you talk with non-frum people, you give them a gift. You include a card with a list of the brachas. So from your point of view, you're making them, now they could be making the bracha, they won't be making the bracha, but you're making that available. Similar to what people say by inviting people for Shabbos, where you're giving them a place where they can stay. So those are a number of different solutions, and each case needs to be judged individually to see what's the best solution there. This week was Rosh Chodesh, and we often get this question about, another question here, about going to the oil on Rosh Chodesh. The minig is we don't go to kvarim on Rosh Chodesh. That's not a halacha, it's a minig, and part of the reason for the minig is that because on days like Rosh Chodesh, you're not supposed to be maspid, you're not supposed to eulogize. When people go to a kever, that causes crying, that causes a form of eulogy, and that might be a problem. There's also, when it comes to kibbutz tzaddikim, in certain svarim, it says that tzaddikim are not there on their kvarim, on the Shabbos, Yom Tov, Rosh Chodesh, and things like that. So generally, the meaning is not to go to kvarim on Rosh Chodesh. I will, however, say that the Rebbe went several times on Rosh Chodesh. He even went on Chol Hamoed, on Hoshayna Rabbah. In fact, in relation to Chol Hamoed specifically, the Rebbe once told a Yid who asked if you can go to the oil of the Frierdiker Rebbe on Chol Hamoed, and the Rebbe said, depends how you're going. Are you going like you're going to the kever of a tzaddik, or are you going as if you're going to a living Rebbe who just moved a couple of blocks down? So he used to be living over here and now is living somewhere else. And if you're going in that manner, it's not a problem. You can even go on Chol Hamoed. And like I said, the Rebbe did go on Chol Hamoed. On one occasion, interestingly, it was Rosh Chodesh Menachem Av, and the Rebbe was planning to go to the oil. And for what I understand, one of the maskiris mentioned to the Rebbe just to point out that today is Rosh Chodesh, and the Rebbe told him that Rosh Chodesh Menachem Av, it says in Shulchan Aruch that it's a day of the passing of Aaron HaKohen, and if it's a day that tzaddikim fast that day, it's actually not a regular type of Rosh Chodesh. So there went the argument that you can't go on Rosh Chodesh for Rosh Chodesh Av. But it so happens to be that 2 times afterwards, several months later, and then again after that, the Rebbe went again on Rosh Chodesh. So, and that was not a day that's mentioned in Shulchan Aruch as Tainas Tzaddikim. So the Rebbe, although regularly would not go on Rosh Chodesh, he would normally go Erev Rosh Chodesh, but you can't really say it's a problem to go on Rosh Chodesh. It is a minig, but like going to the kever of a Rebbe, where a person goes to a Rebbe as a living Rebbe, for sure wouldn't be an issue. Another question on another subject matter altogether. Someone wanted to know, he's noticed people when they're washing, they use a lot of water. And they keep on refilling and pouring so much more water. Is this like overdone? I mean, it says you're supposed to wash your hands properly and not wash b'tzimtzum and not be wash exactly your revius and exactly to the edge. You're supposed to wash not only to the knuckles, but even further. There's 2 opinions how far you're supposed to wash. So we wash the entire hand. But this overdoing it, is this yours? Is this gaavah? Is it wasting water? So the Eshel Avram, a sefer from a Talmud of the Badichver, the Rav David B'Chach writes that it says in Shulchan Aruch that you should use a lot of water is only when it has halachic benefit, but not stam, just to waste water. But there's a sefer called Nimukei Rechaim of the Munkacher, and he has a whole Torah arichas that this dafken in to fill up the kvar, the thing that you fill up with water, you fill up the kvar, fill it all the way to the top, and use a lot of water. And he brings that with tzaddikim that actually did that, and they said, but this is what the Gemara says, that I do a full washing, and I get full benefit and full favor and full brachas from the Eibishter. Full over here means filling it all the way to the top. And even though someone has a kvar which is extremely large and has more than a shear, still isn't in to fill it to the top and wash b'shefa. And it is also brought that this idea of washing b'shefa is not only the first time you wash, but even the second time, which in Chabad the meaning is to wash 3 times, so even the 3rd time. And today's day and age, whereas in the past people spoke about Baal Tashchis, and they spoke about the fact that it's a tircha, and there's not enough water. Today's day and age, we have so much water, that bit of water, the extra water that we're using for washing, really wouldn't be an issue. Let's move on to another question. The question I've been asked, and we often are asked, you're walking on Shabbos, walking down the street, and because of your walking, you're causing another car to stop or slow down. Is it a problem that you're causing another car to stop on Shabbos? Particularly if it's a Jewish person driving the car. The answer is no, it's not an issue. Even if Chas v'Shalom, Rachmana litzlan, there's a Jew that's driving on Shabbos, and because of you, he stopped his car, it's not a problem. Let's think about what happens when he's driving. He's constantly being over on the malacha of havara, of lighting a fire, when he's stepping on the pedal. Every time he stops, the fact that he's stopping, it could be that you're actually causing him to do less malacha than if he would be traveling. He's actually not doing malacha of havara. Also, he's actually continuously doing an isser. So he's been doing this anyhow. He's actually doing an Isser anyhow. All that's happening now is you're actually changing one Isser to another Isser. Whether he's doing Havara, lighting a fire, or Kibu, extinguishing the fire, because he's stopping. You're not making it easier to him to do the Isser. You're not doing anything that's affecting him in any way. You might arguably, you could say that you're actually protecting him from doing an Isser, because he was still not doing a more serious Isser, which is lighting a fire. Now extinguishing usually is less, usually would be a Malacha Shein and Tzricha L'Gufa, because you're not extinguishing with the purpose of making charcoal, which is, there has to be a functional, constructive purpose in the extinguishing. Just the extinguishing over here is that it should not be a fire, not because you want to get something from extinguishing the candle. So, besides for the fact, you're really doing the right thing. You're not supposed to, you don't have to stop doing what you're doing. You're not doing something for him. Because you shouldn't stop because someone else might do malacha because of that. There's similar cases where a person's teaching Torah. Maybe a guy will come and listen, and I'll teach Torah to Goyim, but I'm doing the right thing, I'm teaching Torah to my students. Or in Eretz Yisrael, people will often go and protest for Chil Shabbos. The police might come as a result of me protesting, but I didn't ask the police to come. I'm doing the right thing, I'm doing a normal thing. Shlomo Zalman Auerbach writes, they allowed someone who's not well, not talking about if he's a sakanas nefashos, sakana, he's not in danger, he's going to a doctor. Now this doctor is a mechal Shabbos. So if I go to the doctor will turn on the light. Do I have to consider the fact that he's going to turn on the light? No, I'm doing the right thing. Indeed, you're allowed to go to a bezdin and make a claim in bezdin, and you know the other person might deny the claim, might even swear falsely. You're allowed to administer an oath to someone else because he's swearing. Why is that not lifnei? So there's multiple answers, but one of the answers here is that I'm doing my own thing. Besides for the fact that in this particular case, like we mentioned, I'm actually helping him to do better than what he was doing till now. And furthermore, he's supposed to stop. He's actually doing a mitzvah of pikuach nefesh. He's losan al dam rech. He's not supposed to run over people. So I'm not causing him to do an Aveda. He was driving and now he's stopping. He was doing an Aveda originally. Now he's actually doing, now that he's already driving and he's stopping, he's actually making sure not to run into someone and drive over someone, which is Loisam al dam re'echa. Besides, a general argument for all of this is there's a law that you're supposed to stop. So he's not really stopping for me. He's stopping because the law says that he's supposed to stop. Okay, that would only work if he's stopping in a place where the law says he's supposed to stop, not where he just is in the middle of the street and there's no law that he has to stop. And you don't have to make way for the pedestrian, depending on the place, depending on the law. But the most important part is not really adding any Chil Shabbos whatsoever. It's minimizing the Chil Shabbos, and therefore it wouldn't be a problem. Talking from one issue in Hilchos Shabbos, I'll move on to another issue in Hilchos Shabbos. Question was asked, someone left money in their pocket, in their coat pocket, and now it's Shabbos and there's money in the coat pocket. Can they wear this coat? So there's multiple aspects to this question. Firstly, you can't wear an item, you can't wear something which has, even if it wouldn't be muktzah, something in a place where there's no eruv, even indoors, because you might end up carrying it outdoors. So, but that wasn't the question over here. This case, the person's question was that they actually emptied out the money from the pocket. They found a way how indirectly the halacha is muktzah tiltul begufa. If you move it indirectly, the back of your hand, shake it out, there was no money in it anymore. But the question was that the halacha is there's something called a basas l'davar asur. If something muktzah is laying on the table, not only the muktzah is forbidden, the entire table becomes muktzah, it becomes a base for the muktzah item. So the coat now seemingly became a basas to the money. There's a pocket in the coat with money. Now the entire coat is muktzah, even if there's no money in it anymore. Is that really the case? So firstly, the rule of basas is only b'maniach v'loy b'sheicheach. Is only if you intentionally wanted it to be there on Shabbos. And that could happen. You have a coat, you don't normally use this coat, and your plan was to leave your money in it. So then that coat would be muktzah, even if the money is no longer in it. Even if a guy came and took out the money, whichever reason the money is not in it. But if you forgot to empty your pockets from money, the coat doesn't become muktzah because of the money. The money is muktzah, but not the coat. That's rule number one. Rule number two, even if you intended to put money in a pocket so it should remain there throughout the entire Shabbos, and later you changed your mind and you decided you want to wear dafka this coat on Shabbos, it really depends what kind of pocket we're talking about. There are two types of pockets. There's a pocket where the garment is a wall, serves as if it's a wall to the pocket, and there's a pocket where the pocket is sewn on top of the garment. Let me give you two examples so you'll know what I'm talking about. The typical shirt pocket is the pocket is formed via the shirt itself. The shirt itself is the pocket, and on top of that you sew something else to be the front of the pocket. The back of the pocket is the shirt. In such a case, the shirt itself becomes a basis l'davar asar because the pocket and the shirt are considered one entity, and the fact that there's money in the shirt pocket, the entire shirt becomes muktzah and you can't move the shirt, even if currently there's no money in there anymore because it was there in the beginning of Shabbos. If you're talking about a pocket that's sewn on top of a garment, like a typical pants pocket, which the pocket is not part of the pants, it's something else that's sewed onto it, the pocket is a standalone thing, then the beged, the pants, does not become a basis, a base for what's inside the pocket. The pocket is a separate item completely. The pocket is secondary to the garment. And then you're allowed to move the garment. The only problem is you have muktzah, that you have to get rid of the muktzah. So you could shake the muktzah out of the pocket. Don't put your hand into the pocket. Don't touch the pocket from the outside to shake out the money, because the pocket is, after all, muktzah. But as long as you shake it out, the coat itself does not become muktzah. You can wear that coat gesund to hate and frelach throughout Shabbos. Okay, another question which involves a number of examples. I asked this question from a Rav in Eretz Yisrael who wrote many sefarim, and he asked a general question. A person made a bracha on a mitzvah, and the person who made the bracha spoke after the bracha. The question is, if the people that listen to the bracha, are they yotze the bracha? So I asked him to give me examples to know exactly what he was talking about, and he gave me several examples. An example was where a person made Kiddush Friday night, and after he made Kiddush, he spoke, and then he drank from the wine. So since his bracha was not done properly because he spoke, maybe the people that listen to Kiddush, you're not allowed to talk after Kiddush before you drink the wine. Maybe the people listening to Kiddush also not yotze Kiddush. Second example, someone is making a bracha on tefillin, but for some reason he's being moitzi someone else. The other person asks him, can you make the bracha for me? And the person making the bracha on tefillin spoke after the bracha. Chanukah candles, often the family, particularly the woman and the children, are yotze the brachas of Chanukah, mitzvahs Chanukah, from the father who was lighting the menorah. The father made the brachas and then he spoke, intentionally or unintentionally, between the brachas and lighting the menorah. Sukkos, person making Kiddush said a leisha b'sukkah, and then he spoke between the bracha and sitting in the sukkah, right after the bracha, and other people are being yotze leisha b'sukkah. So the short answer is, it's not a hefsek. It is a hefsek, but the people that are listening, for them it's not a hefsek, and they are fully yotze. But let's take this through slowly. So let's start with the example of Chanukah, the most recent Yom Tov that we had. When it comes to Chanukah, the people listening to the menorah lighting, they don't actually have to hear the bracha, strictly speaking. So they are yotze the menorah, whether they heard the brachas, didn't hear the brachas, so it's irrelevant. They were yotze the brachas, not yotze the brachas. They don't have a chiyuv listening to the brachas to begin with. Now, other than Chanukah, let's Kiddush, you're supposed to hear the Kiddush. Why is it okay? So the emes is that this question was asked also when they get to Brichas Hanen. We have Brichas Hanen and Brichas HaMitzvahs. Brichas Hanen is brachas that you make on food. Brichas HaMitzvahs brachas you make on mitzvahs. So in Brichas Hanen is a very, very big machlokes. If you could be moitzi someone if your bracha was not said properly. If your bracha was not said properly, it becomes a bracha of atolah, and therefore you didn't make a proper bracha. And therefore the other people maybe are not yotze because they didn't hear a proper bracha. But many poskim say that a non-proper bracha does not mean when the person made a hefsek. The bracha, when it was said was a proper bracha. Later there was a hefsek. So they were yotze the bracha. They didn't make a hefsek, would be okay. But let's talk about Brichas HaMitzvahs. Brichas HaMitzvahs is even better. Because Birchas HaMitzvahs, we have a halacha of arvis. You're allowed to, since every Yid is responsible for other Yidden, when you're making a bracha, even if you're not being yotzer right now, you could just make a bracha for them. So who cares the fact that you were mafsik, that you spoke after the bracha, and you can't be yotzer? Even if you wouldn't be yotzer, you can make brachas for other Yidden. This argument, clearly the Torah Shor makes this chilik regarding Birchas HaMitzvahs. The Birchas HaMitzvahs, it seems like everybody would agree. There are poskim that disagree with this argument also, but the Torah Shor argues, and we find this clearly from the poskim in Hilchos Shofar, where Baal Tekeya, it comes out that if the Baal Tekeya would speak, it wouldn't be a problem, it could be mighty other people. So, Lemaisa, Poel Mamish, if a person made a bracha to exempt other people, and he spoke after the bracha, we're not particularly concerned, and we are concerned that for him it's a hefsek, but for the people that listened, it's not really a problem. I'm just going to share one more final question, which is negay to Hilchas Chala. The question I was asked is that the halacha is, it was a bit of an interesting question because a person made a mistake in a particular halacha. The halacha is that when it comes to Hilchas Chala, chalas, and if a person forgot to separate challah, and it comes Friday night, and they have the challah in front of them, so in chutz laretz we have a solution. Chalas chutz laretz, the halacha is oichel v'hoilech v'achrach mafresh. When it comes to chutz laretz, you can eat and separate the challah later. So you don't have to worry about the fact that your challah was not separated, and therefore this challah is tevel. Because in chutz laretz, you'll separate after Shabbos, that's fine. You can eat even before challah was separate. Ideally, you're supposed to separate challah before it was baked. If you can't separate challah before it was baked, you separate after it's baked, which is what we do with matzah. And if you didn't separate after it was baked, and it's already a time that you can't separate challah because it's Shabbos, so no problem. Eat and leave a tiny bit over. The Ramah says, it's a machlokes rishonim, the Ramah says what you have to do is, you have to leave an amount that you will separate from that amount also. Shireh nekar, in other words, you leave a tiny bit of challah, and after Shabbos, from that tiny bit, you separate from that also. So that should be, it should be shireh nekar, it should be something that's remaining, that you'll notice what was separated and what was not separated. The question that I got was, let me go to the actual question that we got. The question the person asked was, they didn't know the halacha very clearly, and they thought they have to separate they have to leave a full loaf of bread. I don't know where they got that from. The basis of the mistake seems like the halacha is that from each batch, you have to leave a bit of challah. Each batch, which was chayav b'challah independently, not from each loaf. But they, for whatever reason, they thought you have to leave a full loaf, so they were eating the challah Friday night, and they left a full loaf. Now they realized they made a mistake, and now their question was, what happens, could they eat part of this loaf right now? So this brings us to a different question. Because they decided in their mind that the entire loaf should be challah, it could very well be that in their mind the entire loaf already became challah just by the very fact that they thought so, because that becomes almost like a neder. So now what they would really have to do is they have to annul their commitment to make the entire loaf challah, and then after Shabbos they have to again now leave a tiny bit and separate from that bit. The other question, which is a question not in this particular strange case, a general question, when a person leaves a tiny bit of challah in chutz laretz, small slice, they didn't separate challah, it's Friday night, they leave a tiny bit, they'll eat it afterwards. I'll just mention before I go to the question, an interesting thing, the meaning of a lot of people is they don't need the edge of a bread. Nobody knows the source for this minig, why people don't need the edge of a challah. The Minchas Yitzchak writes, we don't know the source, but that's the meaning of Nashim Skenis, that's what the Baba did. Yiddish Shamamas do something, we follow them. The Yishalmi says, Tzarich lemechesh, we have to be concerned what people are concerned about. People are concerned about not eating the edge of the bread. You can forget your learning, it's argued. The Rashba writes, or it's brought the name of Chuvas Rashba, that meaning Nashim Skenis, about the power of a meaning that's old Yiddish Shamamas, Yiddish Babas are doing. So, we don't know the source, but I've once heard argued that the reason for this minhag was in case someone was not mafresh challah, so always leave a tiny piece, the edge. So it's hard to leave the edge. Anyhow, the question here is, when you leave the challah for after Shabbos, and now after Shabbos you have now leftover challah, do you make a bracha now after challah, after Shabbos? So Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was mechadish, a chiddush on his own, that no, you shouldn't make a bracha, because there's no evident, you only do it when you do a real hafrashas challah. He argued, part of his argument was, even according to the Ramah, which is what we do, that you leave a piece and you separate from that piece, since the way it works is that it's challah mafreya, retroactively when you ate, it's as if it was separated then, you don't make a bracha on something that happens retroactively. So, the emes is that if we say that you're supposed to separate after Shabbos, Shireh, and the Yikar is supposed to leave a piece, then it doesn't happen retroactively. It's not clear that it happens retroactively. And even if it happens retroactively, who says that you can't make a bracha when you normally make a bracha when you do the mitzvah, not when the mitzvah is chal, when the mitzvah has its effect. We have a lot of places where we clearly see the brachas on the ma'aseh mitzvah, the action of a mitzvah. And the pashtus of all the poskim, none of the poskim say what Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says. If we would accept that argument that you don't make a bracha, then there wouldn't be a heter to go, not to separate, because a person is missing out a bracha. We have a halacha, adam lo yitrim. A person who's undressed cannot separate truma, because then he can't make a bracha. You can't miss out a bracha. You can't do things in a way that you lose out a bracha. So how could it have been a heter that a person can eat and then separate if he's going and missing out a bracha? Clearly you make a bracha, and that's indeed what quite a few poskim write, the Migdash Mat, the Beis Meir, the Aruch HaShulchan, the Panameiros. And I found actually the Fedish and Rishonim, Sefer HaMa'odos, clearly that when you're separating challah after Shabbos, in such oichel v'hoilach v'achach mafresh or chutz laretz, you do it with a bracha. Another edition, Sefer HaSufis, which is a collection of various manuscripts of Rishonim, writes that in such a case, that you're not going to do the bracha before the action, implying that you can do the bracha afterwards. You missed out on making a bracha over l'asiyaseh. So clearly the consensus is, in such a case, you make a bracha after Shabbos. Kol Tuv, and we'll continue with Shem next week, B'li Neder.